Hey everybody, just Vaughn82. I am back for another, well, you seemed to like my little informational thing yesterday, so I figured I'd give y'all a bit more. Alright, well first of all, we're gonna go over the history of Nintendo again, not the systems we've already covered, which you can see on the shelf behind me. No, alright. Some of you might or might not know what Nintendo did before they made video games, and the answer there is they made playing cards. Now, you're probably not thinking of the right types of playing cards, if you're anything like I was at first. What you're probably picturing in your head is, like ace, spade, jack, queen. No. What Nintendo made were referred to as Hanafuda cards. These are Hanafuda cards. These are actually Nintendo Hanafuda cards. Reprints because an actual set of Nintendo Hanafuda cards is expensive as hell. And I don't know if you can see the little Mario on the Hanafuda card. They're actually on cardboard, like thick cardboard. And the point of it was trying to match seasons, if I understand the rules right, which I probably don't. Either way, they were not doing all that well, I believe, when someone mentioned, hey, why don't you try getting into, this, that, and the other thing, and they tried their hand at it, and things worked out well. As a result, they released... Well, they didn't release it, but they programmed the first Mario Brothers game, which was released on Atari. Now, you might not have ever seen it if you're a bit of a younger viewer, because it's not a very good game, but at the time it was amazing. But that gave them enough money that they decided they were going to start doing other things. So around 1983 came their first system, and some of you might recognize this, some of you might not. This is the Famicom, the Nintendo Famicom, and it was the first video game system since Atari had basically destroyed the market. It actually has built-in controllers. This is a horrible idea. You had to disassemble the system and reassemble it to put new controllers on. And a little thing most people don't know: the microphone, built into controller too. It's not there in any US Nintendo products at all. In Legend of Zelda, it says, I think it was Paul's voice hates loud noises. That's a reference to if you yelled into the microphone, you could hurt him. But that was it. That was the only way to hurt him, I believe. Now, Nintendo, unlike Atari, because the major downfall in the gaming market that Atari made is that they did not at all control who could release games for their system. So, literally anyone with a team of semi-brain damaged programmers who had no idea what they were doing could make video games and release them for the Atari. This is why we ended up with games like Custer's Revenge, which, if you don't want to look it up, I'll just tell you it's a game where you play General Custer, and the entire point of the game is to run to the end of the map and rape an Indian woman tied to a stick. This is the downfall of the Atari. Games like E.T., which is notoriously horrible, they were being mass-produced to the point where the market was flooded. No one wanted to buy them because they were garbage. But Nintendo came along with the Famicom, and they introduced something that, let me see if I can find it on something. I can't, well, here. The Nintendo Seal of Approval. The Nintendo Seal of Approval is the licensing rights. That says that this is an actual product. Someone at Nintendo has played through and gone, hey, it's not garbage. Now, the funny thing is, of course, when they came to the US, they didn't want... So, that came out in 1983. In 1985, the Nintendo came to the US. The Nintendo that, is, at this point, iconic. We all know and love it. And even though it was really poorly designed in the long run, compared to the Famicom, because you might know that some older systems, you have to wiggle the cartridge around back and forth to get it to work. It's because the way the Nintendo's designed, when you put the cartridge in and click it down into place, that's actually... The slot is shaped like a C, and here are the contacts on the cartridge. There are only contacts on the bottom part of the C, and when you put it in, you actually wind up pushing and wedging the connector slightly up off of the motherboard. This got worse if you used something like, say, a Game Shark, because then you were forcing it to work without actually doing what was supposed to be, or you were forcing it to work at an even more obscene angle than it otherwise was supposed to. Now, alright, funny thing, I just showed you this. When the first run of Nintendo games came out in the US, along with the Nintendo, and that's something I forgot to mention about it, you might be wondering why it's called the Famicom. The answer is it's the family computer. It was not just marketed as a video game system, it was marketed as a video game system / computer system. There was accounting software, a keyboard, everything. You could even get a modem for it. But it caught on really large as a video game system, which is why they released the Nintendo, even though the chances of it were succeeding were very slim. Now, they didn't want people to be able to play Famicom games on the Nintendo. That's why they redesigned the system. But they also apparently didn't want to spend a lot of money. And inside the earliest runs of games like Gyromite here, which I'm showing you, and Gyromite came with Rob the Robot, which was an awful accessory, and it came with that way it could be marketed as a toy in the US, basically. But inside of Gyromite, because they didn't want to spend a lot of money, were converters that would allow you to play a Famicom game on an NES, because they didn't feel like making a whole new set of Nintendo games, or of chips for this. So you could do like what I did, open it up, and assemble this little guy. This would allow me to play, and games fit on here tight, so it's not coming off. The only thing is they fit on here backwards compared to how a Nintendo game would go in. And, this is what a Super Famicom game looks like. This is a Nintendo game. As you can see, and I'll just show you an example. Yeah. That was basically what was inside of the cartridge. This, however, is no longer a copy of a game. This is the case that came in, and it's my wallet. Because I get bored and make things. I get a lot of comments on this, actually. Now, of course, it was a few years later, after all the success. Unfortunately, they never did something awesome like release the Famicom disk drive in the US, which was an add-on that actually, it was straight up a disk system, or a floppy disk drive for your Nintendo. But at the same time, Nintendo figured out how to put the disk system games onto cartridges. So we got all the good games, like Zelda, which, we all know at this point. So it was around 1990, with all this great success, they released the Super Famicom. And some of you might know this, some of you don't. In a lot of European countries, this is what your SNES looked like. This is not what the SNES looked like in the US. Now, the SNES was a great little system. I cannot tell you... First of all, it had the sense that it came with a more complex wire jack. Because the RF out on a Famicom, and for those of you who don't know, that's radio frequency out, as far as I can tell, the only reason it exists is because it exists because for a long time there, the only way to get this stuff to work was to convince the television that it was picking up another channel. So it would be a wire that basically told it was converting, it was picking up a television signal. Now, that not only has the RF outbox for older televisions, but it also has a straight up, RCA cable setup, which made it much easier to hook up to televisions, because most of you have not tried to deal with that, or had to deal with RF on older video game systems, but you cannot find televisions that will allow you to play a lot of them anymore. there were a lot of nice little additions for the Super Famicom, like the Satellaview, which was actually designed to allow you to download video games in theory, among other things. And there was actually going to be a CD-ROM system for the Super Nintendo, and the CD-ROM system for the Super Nintendo is actually what we today know as the PlayStation. Sony was developing it for them and then just went, no, we can do this, because something went wrong with the project. Of course, as the years went on, after, that was released in 1990, we got this, the Super Famicom, or Super Nintendo, which we got in 1991. It, much like the Nintendo, actually has a port on the bottom, as you can see right here, where you would have supposedly been able to connect all sorts of nice little peripherals, like this Teleview, and we never got that. We actually never got any of the neat little add-ons for systems. For instance, the Nintendo 64, which is still to this day one of my favorite Nintendo systems, in spite of the fact that its controller looks like 3 penises glued together. And for those of you that didn't live through the Nintendo 64 controller, you're lucky. Because I love this system, but this was horrible. I mean, I think they must have thought that children had 3 hands. But I still love the system. Now, for the N64, what we had was the rather humorously named 64DD. That was the 64 disk drive. Once again, something we never saw in the US, but was fairly popular in Japan. Now, that the Nintendo 64 didn't do as well as people would hope. It still did amazingly, but of course, it did not do perfectly because it was competing with PlayStation at the time, as well as Sega, and they had already switched over to discs, which had a lot better storage space. And the Nintendo 64 just couldn't really compete with that. However, it had a limited library of extremely good games that kept fans very loyal. But they learned their lesson, and next they went on, and we got the Nintendo GameCube. I'm not sure what lesson they learned, because they made sure we got discs that you could swallow. Which, of course, means that they can't store as much as information as the, as a standard disc, but they were doing better and slightly more intelligent about things, and the controller wasn't as insane or perverted looking. And, I actually have, the attachment on here that lets you play Game Boy Advanced games on there. That's what the disc in there was. But they learned, and it took time, but the point is they learned. And it's then, of course, as we progressed further in the years, that we got the Nintendo Wii. A system that I have owned for an incredibly long time, yet I have done very, very little with. Aside from mod it so that I could load ROMs onto it, which I should probably not mention, but oh well. But that's it. That's the history of the Nintendo hand console system, or not hand console, actual console system. I'm sure I'm missing something, but I figured I'd just share that with you because it's interesting when you actually stop and look at it. And I guess I'll cut it off here, and I will wish I had a better necktie. I don't even know why I put this on. I just saw a necktie and went, ooh, I should throw that off. But I also, unfortunately, have to go do dishes because I'm an adult, and being an adult sucks. So, I will talk to you all tomorrow, probably not face-to-face, but till then, peace out.